Why Putin is not ready to meet with Zelensky, and may never be. Agreement at the White House Monday on the next step. A bilateral meeting between Russian President Vladimir Putin and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky seemed broadly unanimous. Then came the Russian response. The idea was discussed that it would be appropriate to study the opportunity of raising the level of representatives of the Russian and Ukrainian sides, said Kremlin aide Yuri Ushakov, briefing reporters on U.S. President Donald Trump's call with Putin. No mention of either leader by name, or any indication the representatives could be raised to that level. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov took a more conciliatory tone in a state TV interview later Tuesday. "We do not refuse any forms of work, neither bilateral nor trilateral," he insisted. "But any contacts involving top officials must be prepared with the utmost care." In Kremlin speak, that means they are nowhere near ready to agree to this. And that should come as no surprise. This is a war that Putin started by unilaterally recognizing a chunk of Ukrainian land, the self-styled Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics, as independent. He has argued Ukraine is an inalienable part of Russia's own history, culture and spiritual space, and its separation from Russia is a historical mistake. So if this meeting happens, as Arisia Lutsevich, the director of Chatham House's Russia and Eurasia Program, puts it, Putin will have to accept the failure of sitting down with a president he considers a joke from a country that doesn't exist. It would also, she argued, be a huge reversal in tone that would be tough to explain to the Russian people. Putin so much brainwashed Russians on state television that Zelensky's a Nazi, that Ukraine's a puppet state of the West, that Zelensky's illegitimate. Why is he suddenly talking to him? The Kremlin not only routinely questions the legitimacy of the Ukrainian leader, fixating on the postponement of elections in Ukraine, illegal under martial law, but in its latest peace memorandum requires Ukraine to hold elections before any final peace treaty is signed. Putin and other Russian officials rarely refer to Zelensky by name, instead preferring the scathing moniker of the Kiev regime. And don't forget, it was Zelensky who traveled to Turkey for the first direct talks between the two sides in mid-May, only for Putin to send a delegation headed by a writer of historical textbooks. Tatiana Stanovaya, senior fellow at the Carnegie Russia Eurasia Center and founder of Our Politik, which provides news and analysis on Russia, argues that while Putin does not view a meeting with Zelensky as critical in a war that for Russia is more about confronting the West than Ukraine, he could still take the meeting if he thought it would be successful. The key demands must be on the table and Zelensky must be okay to talk about it, she told CNN in an interview Tuesday. As of now, Zelensky has ruled out those key demands, which include giving up territory Ukraine still controls. But Putin, she argued, sees Trump as the key to changing that. Trump is seen as an enabler of the Russian vision of the settlement, and for that the United States is supposed to work with Kyiv to push them to be more flexible, to be more open to Russian demands. Stanovaya suggested Russia may try to keep the US on side by doing what Ushakov suggested, and suggesting a new round of Istanbul talks, but with a higher-level delegation, perhaps including Ushakov himself and Foreign Minister Lavrov. But he won't risk an ambush by sitting down with Zelensky, only to find all his demands rejected. Trump ended his day on Monday by posting on Truth Social that he, quote, began the arrangements for a meeting between President Putin and President Zelensky. By the time he had woken up and dialed into the breakfast show on Fox News Tuesday morning, it seemed to have dawned on him this was not a done deal. I sort of set it up with Putin and Zelensky, and you know, they're the ones that have to call the shots. We're 7,000 miles away, he said. Putin has no reason to acquiesce at this point. Having made zero concessions, he has been rewarded with a grand summit in Alaska, the dropping of a demand by Trump to sign onto a ceasefire before a peace talks, and the crumbling of all sanctions ultimatums to date. Having slightly dialed down the scale of nightly drone attacks on Ukrainian cities so far in August, Russia ramped them up again Monday night, firing 270 drones and 10 missiles. If Trump's pressure on Zelensky hasn't yet yielded the results Moscow wants, there's always military force to fall back on. The only wild card for Russia at this point is who Trump will blame when this latest peace effort fails. Why a confirmed date for a Putin-Zelensky meeting is so critical. President Vladimir Putin has not committed to a meeting with President Volodymyr Zelensky, though the White House said plans for a meeting between the Russian and Ukrainian leaders are underway. But there's a critical piece of information still up in the air, an exact date. CNN senior White House correspondent Kristen Holmes breaks down why confirming specifics is so important. White House weighs several locations for possible bilateral and trilateral summits on Ukraine, officials say. A number of locations are being considered for both the bilateral meeting between Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and Russian President Vladimir Putin, as well as the subsequent trilateral meeting that would include President Donald Trump, 3 White House officials tell CNN. Among them are Budapest and Switzerland, the officials said. One official said that Trump himself had discussed the possibility of Budapest in a recent phone conversation with Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orbán, an ally of Trump and Putin. White House officials had eyed Hungary as a finalist for the Trump-Putin summit last week. A war crimes warrant issued in 2023 by the International Criminal Court in 2023 calling for Putin's arrest caused Russia to balk at most other European destinations. But the US and Russia ultimately agreed to hold the meeting on a military base in Alaska. The officials noted that nothing was close to being finalized for the next summit, and multiple sites had been floated for both events and were being discussed. One official told CNN that planning around the trilateral had been put on the back burner yesterday after Trump announced there would be a meeting first with just Putin and Zelensky. Rubio will lead working group on Ukraine security guarantees proposal. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio will lead a working group to draft a proposal for security guarantees for Ukraine, a White House official and another source familiar told CNN. Rubio, who also serves as interim national security advisor, will work with European national security advisors on the proposal meant to ensure Ukraine's defense if it agrees to a deal with Russia to end the war. Axios first reported that Rubio would lead the discussions. Another source familiar said there will be a number of meetings taking place in the coming days to discuss the potential security guarantees. Earlier today, President Donald Trump ruled out the potential for U.S. forces on the ground in Ukraine, but left the door open to other possible U.S. support. The president understands security guarantees are crucially important to ensure a lasting peace, and he has directed his national security team to coordinate with our friends in Europe, and also to continue to cooperate and discuss these matters with Ukraine and Russia as well. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said at a briefing. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney participated in the virtual meeting of Ukraine's allies, also known as the Coalition of the Willing, alongside Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on Tuesday, according to the Prime Minister's office. Leaders welcomed the openness of the United States to providing security guarantees to support long-term peace and security for Ukraine and Europe, the statement from Carney's office reads. This approach is consistent with the principles of no decisions about Ukraine being taken without Ukraine, and no decisions about Europe being taken without Europe. Carney has focused on strengthening Canadian ties with Europe, as he grapples with an ongoing trade dispute with the United States. Soon after becoming Prime Minister, Carney took his first international trip to the United Kingdom and France, to meet with UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer and French President Emmanuel Macron, who together chaired Tuesday's coalition meeting. At the meeting, Carney affirmed Canada's intention to provide, quote, further military and financial support for Ukraine, along with, quote, continued military and economic pressure on Russia to end its aggression, and close coordination with President Zelensky on the development of robust and credible security guarantees. The statement added that Canada welcomes U.S. First Lady Melania Trump's letter to Russian President Vladimir Putin, urging him to consider the plight of children in ending this war. Switzerland willing to host Russia-Ukraine peace talks, Swiss Foreign Minister says. Switzerland is open to hosting Russia-Ukraine peace talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin in attendance, Swiss Foreign Minister Ignacio Cassis told CNN's broadcast partner SRF on Tuesday. We are ready for such a meeting, and we are thankful for the trust placed in us, Cassis said on the sidelines of a diplomatic conference in Bern. We have always signaled our willingness, but it of course hinges on the willingness of the major powers. Cassis added that if Putin attended any talks in Switzerland, the Swiss government would make special arrangements due to the Open International Criminal Court (ICC) warrants against the Russian leader. We have clarified the legal situation, Cassis said. We could hold such a meeting, and we know what needs to be done to ensure it goes smoothly. We can do this despite the arrest warrant against Putin, because of our special role and Geneva's role as the European headquarters of the UN. CNN has reached out to the Swiss Foreign Ministry for comment. In a statement to Russian state media outlet RIA Novosti, the ministry said that, quote, Switzerland is ready to offer its services if they are useful and desired by all parties. This includes its role as a host or mediator in conducting discussions and meetings. Trump ruled out boots on the ground in Ukraine, but not other military options, White House says. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt reiterated today that President Donald Trump has definitively ruled out sending U.S. troops to Ukraine as part of any security guarantees to bring about a peace deal with Russia, but she did not rule out other military options, including in the skies. It is an option and a possibility. I won't certainly rule out anything as far as military options that the president has at his disposal. I'll let him do that. I can tell you he's definitively ruled out boots on the ground, Leavitt said at the White House press briefing, when asked about the U.S. providing air options as a form of security for Ukraine. Trump himself said earlier today he could provide his personal assurance that he would not put U.S. troops on the ground in Ukraine to enforce a peace deal with Russia. Leavitt also said Trump directed his national security team to coordinate with Europe and to continue to discuss the matter with Ukraine and Russia. We can certainly help in the coordination and perhaps provide other means of security guarantees to our European allies, Leavitt said. The president understands security guarantees are crucially important to ensure a lasting peace, and he has directed his national security team to coordinate with our friends in Europe, and also to continue to cooperate and discuss these matters with Ukraine and Russia as well. European Commission Vice President promises new sanctions on Russia after coalition meeting. European Commission Vice President Kaja Kallas said the European Union would help train Ukrainian soldiers and slap new sanctions on Russia after a virtual meeting of the Coalition of the Willing on Tuesday. Putin cannot be trusted to honor any promise or commitment, Kallas wrote in a post on X. Therefore, security guarantees must be strong and credible enough to deter Russia from regrouping and re-attacking. Among those security guarantees, Kallas continued, will be EU training for Ukrainian soldiers and strengthening Ukraine's armed forces and defense industry. Japan ready to participate in security guarantees for Ukraine, Prime Minister says. Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba said that his country will participate in guaranteeing Ukraine's security, but remained tight-lipped on what this would involve, Nippon reported. We'll thoroughly discuss what our nation can and should do, including from the perspectives of laws and capabilities, and play an appropriate role, Ishiba told reporters Tuesday at his office in Tokyo. However, Ishiba stressed that Japan is not in the phase where we can provide details about the support it can offer Ukraine. While not a formal member of NATO, Japan works closely with the military alliance, and Ishiba's comments are a measure of how many Western countries are prepared to help defend Ukraine in the event of future Russian aggression, after a peace deal is struck to end Moscow's invasion. Following Monday's meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump at the White House, European leaders have been discussing how they can provide security guarantees to Ukraine in the future, including by deploying a peacekeeping force. NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte said Monday that 30 countries, including Japan, are working on a framework to shore up Ukraine's security after a ceasefire or full peace deal between Kyiv and Moscow. NATO military leaders will meet Wednesday on Ukraine following White House meeting. NATO military leaders are expected to meet Wednesday afternoon to discuss Ukraine, following a meeting at the White House Monday between President Donald Trump and several key European leaders, including NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte, a senior NATO official told CNN. The meeting, hosted by NATO's Military Committee and announced on X by Chairman of the NATO's Military Committee, Admiral Giuseppe Cavo Dragone, will be briefed by Supreme Allied Commander Europe U.S. General Alex Grinkovich, the official said. As diplomatic efforts to secure peace in Ukraine progress, looking forward to his Grinkovich's update on the current security environment, Dragone said. Remember, future security guarantees for Ukraine were among key topics discussed Monday at the White House. French President Emmanuel Macron told reporters that the first and most important outcome of the talks was the U.S. commitment to help develop security plans. Trump said Monday that while Europe would take the lead on security for Ukraine, the U.S. is going to help them out also. We'll be involved, Trump said. But on Tuesday, he ruled out sending American troops to Ukraine, despite expressing an openness to the idea Monday. Wednesday's meeting will also come less than a week after a summit between Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin in Alaska, at the end of which Trump declared no deal struck on a ceasefire,